Yo, what's good? We're back with another one.
It's showtime.
There is a train tunnel in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where people say that they see a man with a severely burned and almost non-existent face. They say that if you see him at night when you're under the bridge, it made electricity go haywire with his very presence. Tons of kids around the town would actually sneak out, go into the tunnel, and try to get a glimpse of him. Now, the scariest part about this is that when those kids snuck out, they probably did actually see No-Face Charlie. The thing is, his name is not Charlie, his name is Raymond Robinson, and he suffered a severe accident involving an electrical line that left him with a disfigured face. Because of this, he was very insecure, and he mostly stayed inside during the day so people didn't see his face, and he would only venture out at nighttime. And according to this article, he didn't do any haunting. In fact, he was friendly and would occasionally let curious teens take pictures with him in exchange for cigarettes. It almost seems like he was kind of leaning into the urban legend, maybe having a little bit of fun of it, but I know deep down it probably made him a little bit upset. I mean, he did get some cigarettes out of it, but yeah, this is just one of many urban legends that actually turned out to be a real person and be true.
That was pretty sad.
They're gonna get a lot darker, bro.
If you were to somehow go back to the 70s and spend some time in Staten Island, it probably wouldn't take you long to hear about an urban legend of a man named Cropsey. As the story went, Cropsey was a serial kidnapper and killer who lost his son and resorted to stealing other people's children to deal with his grief. According to the legend, Cropsey also had a hook for a hand, scars, burns, and open wounds covering his entire face and body, and a generally horrifying appearance.
Looks like you, bro.
Fuck off, Ted.
Considering the mass areas of uninhabited woodlands, it's not all that unexpected that a tale like the legend of Cropsey would make it into the mainstream culture at some point. Unfortunately, this wasn't just a tall tale made up by Staten Island parents to keep their kids from venturing too far into the woods and getting lost. Although the legend has some obviously made-up elements, such as the hooked hand and the horrifying scars and burns, at some point in the early 70s, children in Staten Island really did start disappearing. That's when the line between legend and reality started to blur, and the story of the real Cropsey immediately replaced the urban legend. This is the real story. Andre Rand was a man from Manhattan who was born in 1944 and moved to Staten Island in the late 60s. After working for 2 years at the infamously brutal Willowbrook State School for Children with Disabilities, Rand was arrested in 1969 and served over a year in prison for the attempted attack of a 9-year-old girl. As soon as he was released 16 months later, reports started cropping up of more little girls disappearing all over Staten Island, including 5-year-old Alice Pereira, who was playing in her building's lobby when she suddenly disappeared without a trace. Over the next decade, Rand was the prime suspect in the disappearances and deaths of several other young girls in the area. But it wasn't until 1983 when he picked up 11 kids from a local YMCA and brought them fast food before taking them to the airport that he was finally arrested and sentenced to 10 months in prison again. Throughout the 70s and 80s, dozens of young kids disappeared in Staten Island, and although Rand was often the last person to be seen with them, there was ultimately never enough evidence to put him away for a long time. For many years, he would often be seen hanging around young kids, going on walks with them, and even taking them to lunch and dinner with him at local restaurants. After years of letting him walk the streets as a free man, police would finally have a breakthrough in the case in 1987 when they found undeniable evidence that Rand had been behind the disappearance and murder of Jennifer Schweiger, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome. In 1988, he was sentenced to 25 years to life, and while he was behind bars, more and more evidence was found that tied him to several other disappearances in Staten Island in the 70s and 80s. Unfortunately, he was only charged with one additional major crime in 2004, which was the kidnapping of Holly Ann Hughes, thanks to which he will spend the next 13 years behind bars until 2037. If he lives that long, he'll be 93 by the time he gets out.
I bet the inmates have took care of him by now.
Nah, bro. He's still alive.
The legend of the Brooklyn vampire told of a boogeyman of sorts, who seemed immortal and who would enjoy hurting himself and others, that spread across New York and eventually the entire United States. The legend described a depraved half-man, half-monster who would eat and survive off of things that no normal person would eat and would take men, women, and children alike away, never to be seen again. In the early 1900s, a large number of unlucky children found out that this wasn't just an urban myth after all. known by several names, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Gray Man, and the Brooklyn Vampire, a man named Albert Fish was a real-life killer whose attacks took place over the span of a decade, causing terror across the entire country. He had a disturbing and troubled youth, which set the groundwork to become a monster. His brother and father both died when he was very young, and mental illness as well as a religious mania ran rampant throughout his family. Unable to take care of him due to her instability, his mother put him in an orphanage where he was whipped and beaten regularly. But that is where Albert truly changed. As it happened so often, he started to learn to enjoy the pain. He would find young men and torture them after having sexual encounters with them, many of his victims never being found to this day. For a while, he actually stopped after getting married and having kids, but after his wife left him, he went off the deep end. For over a decade, his crimes became increasingly violent, twisted, and frequent. It's unknown just how many young people he killed, but it's believed to be numerous. One boy named Billy Gaffney actually escaped a kidnapping attempt, and after being interviewed famously said, "The boogeyman took me." It was later discovered that the victims he successfully took, he would cook and eat. He began to lust for human meat and blood, earning him the name the Brooklyn Vampire. When he couldn't harm others, he would take pleasure in doing things to himself that are so gruesome that I cannot mention them in this video because they're just so disturbing. In the end, he was caught and during his trial pleaded insanity, claiming to have heard the voice of God telling him to kill. But upon his initial arrest, Fish boasted that he had a victim in every state, meaning that nobody was safe from the Brooklyn Vampire.
That was fucking grim.
They're not all this dark, bro.
A real story of genuine mystery and paranormal activity. The story starts on August 15, 1918 in Japan. 17-year-old Eikichi Suzuki was touring for a maritime exhibition and discovered a doll in the window of a shop. The doll instantly drew his eyes. Suzuki didn't think twice and walked in and instantly purchased it for his baby sister, Okiku. The doll was roughly 40 centimeters tall and dressed in a traditional kimono. Its hair was black and cut to shoulder length in a traditional Okapa hairstyle. Suzuki went back home and gave the doll to his sister. It didn't take long for the doll to become Okiku's favorite toy, and more importantly, her best friend. Okiku played every day with the doll, took it everywhere, and treated the figurine like a younger sister. She would feed it and sleep with it. She decided to call the doll Okiku, named after herself. A year later, tragedy struck. In 1919, Okiku died due to the yellow fever. The family wanted to bury the doll along with Okiku. However, the doll was never laid. The doll, Okiku, was instead placed in the family's altar, a common practice in certain Japanese households to commemorate the dead. The small shrine celebrated their daughter and marked her passing into the afterlife. One day, the family started to notice that the traditional shoulder-length hair with clean ends had now become a mangled mess with split ends reaching down past the doll's waist. It was scruffy, odd colors, and felt different. Chilling events intensified and grew into full-blown acts of spiritual infestation. Lights flickering on and off, bangings in the house, noises, and strange voices. Over time, they were certain that their daughter's soul was in fact trapped in the doll, with town shamans actually confirming their theories to be true. In 1938, the family relocated to a different district. They had gotten used to their daughter's spirit and saw it as a blessing rather than a curse. But they feared that taking the doll with them would cause the spirit to leave the doll due to the proximity of the daughter's grave. So a family approached the local temple and asked them to look after Okiku the doll. The temple by now had heard many stories about the doll, and the priests gleefully accepted in looking after Okiku. The doll still remains to this day at the Minenji Temple in Hokkaido, with confirmations that the hair does indeed grow. The story gets weirder though. The temple had actually sent off samples of the hair for scientific study, and it came back that the hair was in fact the hair of a human, more specifically, a child. The story of Okiku is still shrouded in mystery, but no one can excuse the real evidence that the doll does in fact grow hair.
That's gotta be bollocks.
Nah, bro, they tested the hair. It's real.
In the 1970s, there was a horrifying discovery that what the Carnival Funhouse presented as a creepy prop was actually a real human corpse. The story claims that the mannequin had been hanging as a decoration for years, with thousands of people passing by, taking photos, and even touching it without realizing they were interacting with actual human remains. The carnival workers positioned and repainted the prop regularly, believing it to be just another spooky decoration. It was also known that children were surprised by how realistic it looked, unaware they were viewing a genuine corpse. The truth behind this legend is the case of Elmer McCurdy, an unsuccessful train robber killed in a 1911 shootout with police in Oklahoma. After his death, no one claimed his body, so a funeral director embalmed it with arsenic and displayed it for paying customers. The body was later sold to various traveling carnivals and haunted houses. McCurdy's mummified remains eventually ended up at the New Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach, California, and in December 1976, during filming of The $6 Million Man, a crew member moved the mannequin, causing its arm to break off, revealing human bone. Medical examiners confirmed it was a real human body. Investigations revealed the body had been painted multiple times with phosphorus paint and decorated as various props throughout the years. McCurdy's corpse had traveled across America as a carnival attraction for 65 years before being discovered. He was finally buried in Summit View Cemetery in Oklahoma in 1977.
That was insane. How could no one have noticed it was a real body?
We should do an episode on carnivals, bro.
The 1992 movie Candyman introduced audience members to a scene that's almost become cliché. A villain bursts through the bathroom mirror to attack an unsuspecting victim. The story was known to many for a long time as an urban legend, but no one really knew the true story behind it. What many people don't realize is that this scene was actually based on a terrifying true event. Our story follows a lady named Ruthie Mae McCoy, a woman who'd spent a large portion of her life completely terrified over nothing. She was an extremely paranoid lady. People who knew her claimed that she was the kind of lady that would talk to herself and scream at strangers on the street. In 1987, at age 53, Ruthie called 911 from her Chicago housing project, saying frantically that men were coming through her bathroom wall. But Ruth, being the paranoid person that she was, could have potentially been hallucinating the entire event. The dispatcher wasn't 100% certain about what Ruthie was trying to report. He ended up assigning a car to answer a disturbance between neighbors. However, the dispatcher didn't report the call as a break-in attempt, which may explain why police didn't arrive on time. Eventually, another 911 call came in concerning Ruthie's apartment. This one was from a woman who claimed that she was walking through the hallway and heard gunshots coming from Ruthie's apartment. At 9:04, another neighbor called, also reporting the gunshots. So 2 more police cars headed to the scene. 4 officers finally arrived at the building. They pounded on the door, announced their presence, and waited for Ruthie to respond, but they didn't get an answer back. The officers contacted the project office, but the janitor said that he had no key for Ruthie's apartment, and so the police left the building without checking on Ruthie. The following evening, the police got another call from a concerned neighbor. So the police showed up again, did the routine knocking on Ruthie's door, got no response, and left the scene again. So the next day, at about 1 p.m., a project official arrived at Ruthie's apartment with a carpenter who drilled a hole through Ruthie's lock. They found her in the bathroom, lying on her side in a pool of blood, a hand over her chest, 1 shoe on and 1 shoe off. Ruthie had been shot 4 times. The attackers, who have still not been found to this day, broke in through the medicine cabinet in her bathroom, thus spawning the infamous scene from 1992's Candyman.
Candyman's a classic, bro.
Yeah, I didn't know that scene was based on a real event. They came through the fucking cabinet.
Throughout the late 1980s and 90s, rumors of a massive bodybuilder called Purple Aki began to surface in the northwest of England. According to the allegations, Purple Aki would supposedly walk the streets of Liverpool hunting down young muscular men and rugby players and oddly ask them if he would let them feel their muscles. If they complied, he would allegedly squeeze their muscles for much longer than was considered socially acceptable and would then ask them to perform squats so he could feel their quad muscles. Some teenagers reported that Purple Aki even went as far as to ask them to pose for him and often offered exercise and nutrition advice for those who gave him the time. Because the rumors were so incredibly ridiculous, nobody really took them too seriously at first, and eventually the story of Purple Aki turned into an urban legend with crazy details being gradually added to the tale. including one where Purple Aki would allegedly swallow teenagers whole if they let him feel their muscles. But as time went on, it became clear that Purple Aki wasn't just a made-up character created by bored teenagers looking to get some laugh from their friends, but a real person named Akinwul Arobik. Aki was often seen traveling across England by train carrying a plastic bag and asking young men if he could feel their muscles. Naturally, this made a lot of people uncomfortable, and it wasn't uncommon for Aki's face to be featured in local newspapers after several encounters with the law. Most of the accusations against him were related to his creepy behavior around teenage boys, but around 1986, the story of Purple Aki took a really dark turn. Early that year, 16-year-old Gary Keller was walking home from school when he ran into Purple Aki, who immediately asked to feel his muscles. Freaked out by the weird request, Gary said no and ran away. Later that same year, Aki followed Gary to a local outdoor swimming pool, and when the teenager noticed, he ran to New Brighton train station and jumped onto the railroad tracks to get away from Aki. Sadly, the story ended in tragedy, as Gary was accidentally electrocuted by one of the rails. Considering the whole thing happened because Gary was being chased, Purple Aki was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, charged with harassing 14 different teenage boys, and sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. In 1988, Aki filed an appeal and complained that the only reason he had been convicted was because he was black. Ultimately, the judges agreed there wasn't enough evidence to prove Aki had been directly responsible for Gary's death, and believe it or not, he was freed and awarded £35,000 in compensation. Between 1988 and 2006, Aki went in and out of jail for failing to resist his compulsion to touch, feel, and measure other people's muscles, and in 2003 he was arrested for an additional 15 charges of harassment and witness intimidation, for which he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Just like any other predator, he was also forbidden from waiting outside schools in the area. A few months later, he was jailed for 15 months for getting up to his same antics. Upon his release, he was once again arrested a few weeks later in 2010 and then again in 2015. After his latest release, he reportedly moved to Leeds, where rumors started cropping up that he had passed away during the pandemic. However, those rumors were put to rest when videos started surfacing in 2023 of Aki walking the streets of Leeds asking random dudes to, you guessed it, feel their muscles.
I remember this when it was happening. Can't believe they gave him 35 grand.
It's fucked up, bro. And he's still out there.
The Legend of the Dog Boy is a tale of a werewolf-like dog man who would roam around a small town in Arkansas, cruel and sadistic, who would torture animals and eventually learn to kill. The small town of Quitman had always had urban legends about restless spirits roaming the sleepy town. An old town with history, it was a place during the Civil War for men to enlist. In fact, several World War I soldiers died there, their spirits said to haunt the town to this day. But in more recent years, the town has become notorious for its connection to a real-life urban legend, the family who would come to be known as a true horror story that would raise a killer, the Bettis family. In the 1950s, Floyd and Aline Bettis moved into their new house and had a son, Gerald Bettis. But they knew this boy was anything from normal right from the beginning. Although his parents were said to be good people, Gerald was vicious and cruel and developed some unusual habits early on, including collecting cats and dogs, which he would torture for his own pleasure. In school, kids would pester him and take things away from him, which happened more and more because, strangely, Gerald somehow enjoyed it. He wanted to be aggravated and get attention. But as time continued, the dog boy's actions became more and more sinister. Torturing animals and getting attention by infamy was no longer enough. He needed more. He eventually imprisoned his parents in the upstairs part of their house and would feed them, but only when he decided that it was time for them to eat. A new form of torture for him to enjoy. By the time he was a young adult, at 6'4" and nearly 300 pounds, he towered over his parents, who were no longer able to fight back. He would even beat his father and once threw him out of the upstairs window. His father ultimately died in 1981 due to a broken neck after an accidental fall down the staircase. After this, his mother had had enough. She testified against him in court and he went to prison, where he died in May of 1988 at the age of 34. However, to this day, their old home experiences paranormal occurrences, like the lights turning on and off by themselves, shadowy figures being seen in the windows at night, and individual rooms being freezing cold. The dog boy Gerald Bettis's legend lives on today, as it's said that his ghost walks on all fours and looks like a shaggy dog, inhabiting the town, still looking for a new victim to torture.
Bro, we should do a deep dive episode on the dog boy.
Yeah, let us know in the comments if you'd like us to do a deep dive on any of these subjects.
35% of you haven't subscribed yet. What are you waiting for, bro?
Vacationing couples, newlyweds, or families at Disney, these happy people that are on vacation will check into their hotel. They'll get their room key. They'll go in their hotel room. They'll drop off their bags. They'll notice an odd odor, but they are too excited because they're on vacation. They won't even care. They'll go enjoy a day, whatever they're doing, whether it be Disney or at Hawaiian vacation, whatever the case may be. And that night, they will come back to their room. Tired after a long day, they don't even notice the smell because they're exhausted. They lay in their bed and go to sleep. They wake up in the middle of the night, tossing and turning because their bed is so uncomfortable. And at this point, the smell is becoming unbearable. They turn on the lights to investigate, and at that point, they would be flipping over their mattress to see a decomposing body either in their mattress or below it. This urban legend, once again, sounds like a common campfire ghost story or something you tell your friends before they go on vacation. Check under the bed for bodies. But unfortunately, this chilling tale, which has been confirmed in numerous newspaper reports, describes instances where hotels served as unknowing morgues for bodies decomposing in the mattresses. One specific incident in Atlantic City in 1999, guests slept on a mattress containing a body for an entire night. Similar confirmed cases have been reported in Colorado, Florida, Virginia, and other states, keeping the story alive of unsuspecting victims stumbling upon a gruesome crime scene in their own hotel room. The story is gruesome, gross, and scary, and the fact that this has happened more than once is crazy. I find this wild because if this happened once, I would say that this is grounds for urban legend / one of those crazy stories that just goes around. Like, one time is enough for this. But the fact that this has happened consistently, maybe not consistently, but at least multiple times all across the country is pretty wild. It's kind of like that Doofenshmirtz meme. It's like, if I had a nickel for every time there was a body under my bed, I'd have 2.
How could they not notice the stink of a body under the bed, bro?
I don't know, mate. I've stayed at a few hotels that smell like death.
The Kennebec Valley is one of the most beautiful regions in Maine, with over 5,000 square miles of forests, rolling hills, and natural paradise surrounding the Kennebec River. Many cabin owners of the North Pond area in the Kennebec Valley have described the area as the most peaceful place on Earth. But it hasn't always been that way. All throughout the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, there were reports of over 1,000 break-ins in the North Pond cabins. For decades, nobody knew who was responsible for the thefts, especially since they were always carried out when there was no one home. As the cabin owners soon noticed, the break-ins seemed to follow a pattern, always peaking in the days before Memorial Day and after Labor Day. As for the stolen items themselves, they ranged from food, to cooking utensils, to books, to propane tanks, to toiletries of all kinds. In the absence of a concrete suspect, the locals eventually named the thief the North Pond Hermit, even though by this point there was nothing to suggest the break-ins were being carried out by a single person. Although it wasn't uncommon for groups of homeowners to venture out into the woods to try to find the North Pond Hermit, they never found a trace, which only added to the legend's mystery. One afternoon in 2002, 100 people attended a North Pond homeowners meeting, and when someone asked how many of them had suffered break-ins, almost all of them raised their hands. As you can probably guess, the North Pond Hermit quickly turned into somewhat of a boogeyman, with the legend frequently being shared over campfires in the area. For years, nobody thought that the person or people behind the break-ins would ever be found. But in April 2013, a man named Christopher Thomas Knight was arrested in the middle of the woods in the North Pond area by an officer who had made it his sole mission to bring the thief to justice. As soon as he was brought to the police station, the cops asked him why he wasn't answering any of their questions. At first, it seemed as though he was having trouble speaking, but eventually he responded that he was ashamed of himself. As it was later revealed, Christopher had been living out in the middle of the woods by himself in an unheated nylon tent, surviving only on the things he stole from nearby North Pond cabins. Shockingly, he had survived winter temperatures of 20 degrees below zero for years and hadn't been to a doctor or taken any medicine for 3 decades. What's most incredible about the hermit's story is that for the entire time he lived in the woods, he didn't have a single conversation with another human being, except for one time when he ran into a hiker and only said hi. Understandably, Chris had lost interest in keeping track of time, so when he was asked how long he had been in the woods by himself, he replied, since the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown, which took place in 1986. As investigators later found out, he was 20 years old when he decided to become a hermit, just a couple of years after high school, although he never gave the authorities a real reason why he decided to disappear. In all his years of isolation, he went to extreme lengths to preserve his privacy. He never lit fires, only moved at night, and hadn't had any kind of communication with the rest of society for more than half of his life. He'd never driven a car, sent an email, or even known what the internet was until his arrest. Interestingly, as the cops dug deeper and deeper into his story, they realized that his only real possessions were his glasses, which he had been wearing for 30 years and could even be seen in his Lawrence High School yearbook picture from 1984. Everything else, down to his underwear and jacket, had been stolen. After the investigation, Knight was sentenced to 7 months in prison, after which he once again disappeared.
He must have done something to have gone into hiding for so long, bro.
He was probably just ashamed of stealing. There's something quite appealing about living in the woods away from other people.
A bus is transferring a group of mental patients from Fairfax County to Lawton Prison. Fairfax County drew a lot of controversy from local residents, upset that there was an insane asylum situated deep inside their local woods. Due to this, the asylum was shut down and the patients began to be transferred. On a trip to Lawton Prison, the bus driver began losing control of his vehicle, swerving and eventually crashing. All the patients that were on the bus made the most of this opportunity and made their escape from the bus, disappearing into the nearby woods. In the days that followed, police managed to track down each of the patients that escaped, except for one. This last patient seemingly vanished into these woods, never to be seen again. After a few months of the last patient being missing, odd things started to happen in the woods that he ran into. Locals started to notice that the rabbit population was slightly dwindling, and eventually some of these rabbits ended up here at what is officially called Colchester Overpass, a small, dark tunnel with train tracks running over the top. Unfortunately, these rabbits that were found at the overpass were no longer with us, being hung in the tunnel by an unknown assailant. Soon after this, the story goes that a number of teenagers decided to have a gathering at the Colchester Overpass, but when the clock struck midnight, they too suffered the same fate of the rabbits. This story would eventually turn this location to be known as Bunnyman's Bridge. Decades later, the legend of the Bunnyman became a famous talking point amongst the town, but no sightings had taken place over the years until one night. Roughly around midnight, a young engaged couple decided to park their car in an area surrounded by some property. Soon after switching off the car, they heard some distant yelling. Next thing they knew, the back window of their car had been smashed. Startled and shocked, the couple quickly drove off. As they escaped, they saw something emerge from the darkness. They saw a big white figure, seemingly a man dressed in a rabbit suit, watching them drive away. 2 weeks after this sighting of the Bunnyman, a second encounter occurred. A private security guard was patrolling an area when he noticed someone standing on the porch of a new unoccupied house. As the security guard approached, he noticed this person was wearing a white bunny suit and appeared to be holding a weapon. As the guard started talking to the bunny started taking swipes at a nearby pole with his weapon, cursing trespassers before threatening the guard and telling him to get out of here. After these two bizarre sightings, the Bunnyman seemed to disappear again, with no evidence to support the identity of him. As with many urban legends, there are many different variations to the Bunnyman story, but it is thought that somewhere in there lies the true story. It might not include teens and rabbits being attacked or escaped mental patients, but it is known that there was or is a Bunnyman out there, threatening those that he feels are trespassing. Still to this day, many people head to Bunnyman's Bridge on Halloween night, and on the stroke of midnight, await his murderous return.
He's still out there, bro. But we'll have to save that for next time.
Hold up, Ted, we got to do the giveaway.
Leave a comment on this video for a chance to win in our next episode. Let's do this, bro.
Bang bang!
Black, black.
Pick something from our merch store and we'll send it straight out. We don't do sponsors in our content, and that's thanks to our channel members and everyone buying the merch.
Members get an extra episode every week, bro. And we got a free Discord too. Come say hi.
And as always, thanks for watching. Remember to like, comment and subscribe. And we'll see you in the next one.